So hello again, I'm Jill Capello. I'm Membership Associate at Informs. So let's get started. Thank you to everyone for joining today's webinar, which is sponsored by Women in ORMS, or WORMS, as well as the Inform Speakers Program. First up is Banafsha Bazad, who will introduce our speaker. Banafsha is an associate professor at California State University, Long Beach, as well as the president of WORMS. Banafsha, I'll turn it over to you.
Sorry. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jill, for the introduction. And thank you, everyone, for being here. We are very excited for this webinar. So the topic is faster, safer, healthier adventures in OR. And our amazing speaker is Dr. Sommer Gentry. She's a member of the faculty at the Department of Surgery and Population Health at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine. And she was kind enough to accept our invitation and to present this talk. Before we start, I want to briefly talk about WORMS, the Forum Women in ORMS. So WORMS was established in 1995, and the purpose was to encourage discussion and interaction among individuals who are having interest in the issues facing women and their relationship to the profession of operations research and management sciences. I wanted to encourage everyone that if you are not a WORMS member, to please become a WORMS member. We are trying to expand our membership, so we appreciate your help. You can always become a WORMS member when you're renewing your Informs membership, or if it's in the middle of the year and you want to become a member earlier, you can always send any of us an email, either me or Jill, and we're going to send you a proper form and you can become a member immediately. Also on the Informs Speakers Program, who helped us a lot with all of these webinars this year. You have the option of having a great speaker for your next event, either if you are active in chapters or societies or fora, or even at your university. There are experts who can talk about our field, operations research, analytics, and management sciences for like in-person talks or virtual talks. And again, there's a proper form that if you go on the website, you can complete that and request a speaker. So with this introduction, we're going to start the presentation. I'm going to stop share so that Sommer can share her slides. And just a tip about questions. We are welcoming questions during the talk. So if you have any question, please use the Q&A feature or the chat feature in the middle of the talk. Type your question there, and then I'm going to read the question to Sommer, and she's going to answer it. All right, Sommer, there you go.
Thank you so much for the invitation and for the introduction. I am really excited to be here with WORMS, and basically I'm here to tell you about some of my favorite applications of operations research that I have worked on, or really just that I've heard about that I think are really awesome. And so I'm going to talk to you about papers and things that I've published, but also a lot of work by others. And I apologize in advance that I haven't done a great job of citing them on all of the contributors that gave work and images that I'm going to use in my talk, but I'm always happy to send you back to the original manuscripts and things at the end. If you want to contact me, I will tell you where all these great applications came from. But for now, we're just going to speed through, and I'm interested to tell you about what is operations research and what are the kinds of problems that I like to work on. So this talk is about how we can sort of live faster, safer, and healthier with operations research. Let's see if I can get the focus back on my talk so I can move my slides. There it goes. Okay. So what is operations research? And Informs defines operations research as the discipline of applying advanced analytical methods to help make better decisions. So we're going to drill down into that and talk about what that phrase means. First of all, applying. This is why I love operations research, because I get to learn about all kinds of different fields, transportation and medicine and public participation and, health insurance, like any field of endeavor. If we are going to apply operations research to it, we get to learn about it, and I get to talk to experts and learn what's interesting and hot within that field. So the applications part of operations research, if you've ever considered studying it, what's cool is you never get stuck in one field. You could really work, you can apply these same techniques. Operations research is like a toolkit that you can use to make things better in lots of different areas. So the applying is really cool for me. Another thing to think about is that I'm going to talk today about decisions. This means we have the power to change the way something works. And we have levers of control, and we want to make the situation be as good as it can be. I'll get more into that, but not only decisions we're making, but we're going to make better decisions. So we get to improve the way the world works, help people be able to vote, be able to get healthcare, et cetera, through operations research. And better means we get to define what it is we care most about. So interestingly, the CEO of American Airlines says that operations research applications, specifically deciding the pricing of the airline tickets, makes them $500 million every year. And that's just one single OR problem. There are tons of operations researchers working for airlines, making that business operate well so we can get where we're going. But I'll tell you something interesting. Although operations research is often used to help businesses function better and make more profit, early in my career, I decided I never wanted to work on a problem where the objective function was measured in dollars. That was just a thing I didn't want to do. So that's why my talk today is about operations research problems where we can define the objective as helping people live better lives in some fashion. And so I'm going to go through a lot of examples of how that can happen. And then about these advanced analytical methods. I'm also really fascinated by mathematics and algorithms. And so I'm going to give you a hint, although not a tutorial, on any of the applications, all the cool methods we use to solve these problems. So a little bit about optimization methods. You're going to hear a little bit about simulation methods, which is where you use the computer to generate 1,000 or 20,000 random situations and try to learn something from that. But so I'll have a little bit to say about the methods too, and try to point those out as we go along. But then there are some people within operations research who focus a lot on generating new mathematical approaches to solve particular problems. I'm more of an applications person. I like to take methods and say, I know where this needs to be used. We need to use it in this situation. And there's a lot of work that it takes to translate from sort of a pure math way of looking at a problem to say, what is it that the people in this situation really need? That mathematical modeling piece is something that gets me excited. Another thing to mention, and this is a new addition to my talk actually, is I think there are other words floating around that people use a lot in conjunction with these types of operations research methodologies. So things like data analytics, data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, these are all words that are really popular right now that I would say are basically overlapping or intersecting with operations research. These may be new methods or they may be old methods to solve the types of problems that operations research has been concerned with for about 70 years. So I'll just talk about these three sort of ways of approaching the data that you have. If you have a great big data set describing what's going on in your situation, you can sort of look at it with methods that are descriptive, where you say, what is going on in the situation right now? Describe it for someone. The next step would be something like predictive. If something about the situation changed, what do we think that the outcome would be? So a predictive method, well, predictive kind of intersects with descriptive because it's just about the domain of application. If you have described what's happening right now, if the new situation is pretty similar to the old situation, maybe that's the same as making a prediction about what will come next. Or maybe you have to be a lot more clever and think about a motivated individual and how they're going to behave and how they're going to want to get a certain thing out of the situation, so that prediction can become pretty difficult, predicting what will happen. But both of those are essential pieces of what I'm excited about, which is prescriptive analytics. Prescriptive means I'm going to give you a prescription. I'm going to tell you what decisions are the best ones to make. And most of the applications I'm talking about today are prescriptive analytics. Even though the other two things are necessary, if I will need to know what is the outcome going to be if I make decision A, in order to tell you, well, decision A is better than decision B. So I kind of need predictive analytics to go along with prescriptive analytics. But mostly what I'm going to talk about here is that I get to make decisions and I'm going to try to find the very best ones of them. So I'm going to prescribe the right thing to happen. So that's just a little bit about some of those other words that people use to describe very much the same mathematics that I'm talking about here. Data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence are all words for some of these same methods. Okay, so let's talk about applications for doing things faster. And this is a cool contest from the 60s about finding the shortest path through all of these, I think it's 33 cities? 33 cities. This was really a puzzle advertised with a great big grand prize in the 60s, and a group of operations researchers got together and solved it, found the absolute best traveling salesman tour through these cities. This is called the traveling salesman problem, very classic within operations research. You could also call it a combinatorial optimization problem. So I want to know to visit every city once and come back to where I started, and I want the car to have to drive the least as I go through there. So how hard is it to solve this? The first thing to know is that it's impossible to solve this problem, even this tiny little one, by writing down all of the possible answers. How many different paths are there through 33 cities? There are 33 factorial paths. Well, let's say 32 factorial if we say we are definitely going to start in a particular city. I think they said they gave you the starting city in that one. So I'm sitting in a city. There are 32 cities that could be my next choice. And after I go somewhere, there's 31 more cities that I have to visit. So there's 31 more choices for what might be next. And after I've visited 2 cities, there's 30 more choices for the next city to visit. This is a really, really huge number. And it means that we need some method that's smarter than just try every possible answer and pick the best one. And that's a feature of most of the problems that concern operations researchers. There's a really huge space of alternatives. The number of things we could do is really, really big. And that's the case whenever you are, choosing a path, even something as simple as like a UPS driver choosing their route to drop off all of their packages and make all of their pickups. Every single day they're solving a problem that's harder than this. UPS actually does have some proprietary software. I don't know a lot of details about the algorithm inside of it. And I think it does not solve to optimality, but it does minimize left turns, which I think is really interesting. Because it turns out that when you make a left turn, sometimes you have to wait longer, and so you idle more, and so you use more gas, but you also risk more accidents. And UPS drivers say that this shortest path solver that UPS uses has made their workday about an hour shorter in many cases. And it also saved hundreds of thousands of gallons of fuel. So help people get through their workday faster. That sounds like a really big win for solving a traveling salesman problem. I think I just have a cute joke here about the traveling salesman problem. So of course, what the person on the right is doing is outsourcing their traveling salesman problem to UPS, because UPS maybe solved it better. But you see that the point being that a brute force solution doesn't work in almost any case where an operations researcher is becoming involved. They're using advanced analytic techniques like dynamic programming or integer programming branch and bound to not have to try every single possibility. There are just too many of them, and that's what makes these problems mathematically interesting. Okay, so here's an example of a traveling salesman problem that, to my knowledge, isn't solved yet. This is a tour through 55,000 or so locations. This is a just for fun problem, so we're trying to make this picture of the Mona Lisa. But as an example of how these solvers kind of work, I take it back, 100,000 cities. The best tour, we know how long it is, but no one has found it. Let's see. I think I'm trying to remember how this goes. So any tour has to be at least a certain length. So when I say the best tour, sorry, that's not the best tour that exists. That's not the best possible way to visit those. It's a good one, but there might be a shorter one out there. There might be a shorter one in between 5,775,191 and 5,757,053. The number that appears there second, that's the lower bound. It can't be any smaller than that, but there could possibly be a better one that we haven't found. And that's a characteristic of what happens when we try to solve these things. Sometimes we can say, well, the absolute shortest it could be is here, and I found a tour here, but I'm not sure if there's maybe a better tour in between. And actually, so solving this problem is one in general. If you could find a way to get a fast algorithm for the traveling salesman problem, that's a problem that is $1 million prize from the Clay Mathematics Institute. So maybe actually I am talking about optimizing dollars after all. Okay. We would like to spend less time waiting for transit, maybe less time waiting for your train. So I'm going to talk now about a program that won the Inform's Edelman Prize. This was many years ago. This was for the Dutch railway system, making a new timetable. That's it. So they improved the functioning of all of the trains serving the Netherlands, this intercity system, greatly without building any new track, without buying any new trains, just by changing the scheduled arrival times and departures. And in some cases, making the trains longer or smaller to fit the demand. But essentially just reorganizing the way this network worked so that you had fewer of one train delaying the next, so that this system was able to carry many more passengers and make more income, so that they can eventually, of course, also invest in the infrastructure. But it's kind of amazing that just something as simple as the timetable, when is the train going to arrive and when is it going to depart, could make such a huge difference. But if you look at this system, it's kind of believable. Look how many intersecting trains there are, and in a lot of cases they share track. And stop for a minute to think about how many variables must have been in the formulation of this problem, right? There are many different possible times for each train, each of 20 or 100 trains that serve a certain stop on a certain day, for all of the stops throughout this system. And then equations that tell you if you've stopped at one place, how early or how late you could arrive at the next place, and how many other trains will be intersecting with me in this system. So this is kind of what a combinatorial optimization problem is going to look like. And it's super exciting that we can help people get on their train in time. Another thing that I've been living lately, since I just moved to New York, I just took a new job at NYU. I'm running a research center there in transplantation. So I'll get to my transplantation applications at the very end of this talk, but I'm in New York and everybody rides City Bike. City Bike is a bike share. And so there are stations where there are bikes waiting for you. And when you arrive, you jump on a bike, you cycle to wherever you're going, and you drop off your bike at a different station. This is a map of some of those stations, I think in Montreal. But Without rebalancing, bike sharing networks wouldn't work. That is, too many people want to ride the bike downhill and nobody wants to ride it uphill. So you would end up with the stations at the bottom of the hill are full of bikes, and the station at the top of the hill, there's no bike for you to take out, right? So what happens is they have cars, they have vans that need to drive around and move bikes from station to station so that when you get to the station, you find a bike to be able to use. There's some predictive analytics in there that say, depending on the weather that day, or depending on whether it's a work day or a commute, whether it's a commuting day or whether it's a vacation day where people are just cycling around the city to do sightseeing, where are there going to be too many bikes or too few bikes to meet the demand? So I think that's a nice application in which there's a lot of work these days. It's lovely to cycle around New York and not have to have a car. Okay, so that's how operations research can help you live your life faster. What about safer? Okay, so the first application is expanding networks of bike lanes. Obviously, bikes are on my mind. Bikes are in the news these days. I think during the pandemic, driving decreased and bicycle ridership increased a lot. And that was a really great opportunity for cities to think about how are bicycles and cars sharing the road network. One reason that people give, and that I would give, for not riding a bicycle as much as I would like is that I don't quite feel safe on a lot of streets. The cars are driving by me really near, and I feel afraid for my safety. And some streets have a bike lane on them, so I really want to ride there. But if I'm trying to get from point A to point B and there isn't a good bike lane in between, that might tip my decision, and I might actually get out my car and decide to drive. Well, if we're gonna say this, a city, maybe Chicago, they have a certain budget that they're able to spend to build some new bike lanes. And where should they build the bike lanes so that they will get the largest number of new bike riders? So people, when they're sitting in their house saying, should I ride my bike there? And then they look up the bike lane network and they say, oh, that's great. There's a bike lane going from where I want to start to where I want to finish. So that's going to make me choose my bike. I'm going to not use my car, and I'll be safer on my bicycle, but also we take cars and pollution and things off the road. So this is an example of an output of a combinatorial optimization problem for deciding the bike lane network. On the left hand, you see where the bike lanes are. The black is the existing bike lanes. And this optimization problem recommended building new bike lanes in all of those orange spots. Of course, there's always trade-offs. And if you build a bike lane, some people will complain that the traffic might get worse if you take away a lane that used to be car lane and you make it a bike lane. It is possible to make the traffic work worse just on that one street. But you could maybe overall decrease the number of cars on the road. So the best kind of operations research modeling is to incorporate all of these different concerns. And this is a really cool application paper that I found from a group at UCLA, where they did predict what would happen to car traffic when they built the new bike lanes. They were able to increase the number of trips from about 3% to about 6.5% of trips being chosen by bicycle in their modeling. So they're doubling the number of bikes taking trips. And so there are fewer cars. The red here on the right shows that a few roads will slow down if you build new bike lanes on them, but also there are all these green areas where cars will move better. And this is, again, a reflection of you have to, in operations research, consider how all the different actors in the system will change their behavior when you make the new system. When you build the bike lane, the car might decide to drive on a different road instead. So I really liked this application of making people safer by being able to build more bike lanes. Okay. How can operations research make us more safe from thermonuclear war? This is a real thing that I loved to get to work on. This was really early in my career. I was working at Lawrence Livermore National Labs, And we had just signed the START treaty with the Russians, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. We agreed to destroy a bunch of weapons grade plutonium so that it could never be used to make a nuclear weapon in the future. And our plan for destroying this plutonium, the plutonium had been enriched, so it had a lot of this isotope 239 that can be used to make a nuclear weapon. But if you mix isotope 239 with other isotopes, it's very hard to separate them again. So now you end up with plutonium that's not enriched, that is very, very difficult to make a nuclear weapon from. And that was our plan, to get rid of our stock of weapons plutonium by mixing it with something else. So I was assigned this model, and this is a simulation model. Well, I'll get to that in a second. The plan was to take all of these different sources of nuclear fuel, and one of them is this 9010. This was my weapons grade plutonium. I have to make sure I mix down so I won't be able to make a nuclear weapon with it. So we're going to mix in there some spent nuclear fuel, some like material left over from the early days of experimentation, some other sources of nuclear material, some scientific sources, and they all have these maybe different proportions of plutonium-239, of the problem, the worrisome isotope. We're going to take all of these different sources and mix them together in a big vat with ceramics and bury them in the mountain, and bury them in Nevada at Yucca Mountain. It seems so there's already an operations research problem here, right? How big does the vat have to be? How much do you take of each of those original stocks? And make sure that after you mix everything, you have less than 80% weapons grade plutonium in the stuff that comes out. But of course, the real problem was harder than that. In reality, we didn't know what was in some of the streams. They were hard to characterize. And so we had to do simulation, where we had the computer create random numbers and say, well, is this 20% weapons grade plutonium? Is it maybe it's 30%? And we had some probability distribution around what we thought was in that stream of material. And we had to come up with a mixing strategy so that the pucks on the end would have a very, very, very low chance of being more than 80% weapons grade plutonium. And then we had to convince, of course, the Russians that this plan would work. So that was a fun simulation. We said 10,000 different situations, guessing what was in each of these streams, and then what it was the probability at the end of the day, which ended up being very low, a low probability that any of the material we got at the end of the mixing process would be weapons grade or proliferatable or anything like that. So that was a fun project. But I accidentally, they gave me like a souvenir puck from that project. It was this little like hockey puck looking thing. And it had a sticker on it that said, Russia, US, plutonium immobilization project. It had like an atom on the thing, and I left it in my bag going through airport security. They were like, what is this? That was a fun conversation. So speaking of airport security, these are a bunch of babies on airplanes. These are babies in their car seats on an airplane. Do you know that the FAA does not require babies under 2 to be in a car seat? You don't have to buy a ticket for a baby under 2. You can take that baby on your lap. They can be a lap child instead. Why on earth would the FAA ever do that when obviously the babies are safer in a plane crash if they're in their own car seat and strapped into an airline seat? I'll give you 1 second to think about that, and I'll tell you why it was the right decision. It's definitely true that this particular baby you're looking at is safer in their car seat on an airplane. But what would actually happen if the FAA said, you have a baby under 2, you must buy them another airline ticket in order to travel by plane? It would mean that more families would travel by car. And in fact, traveling by car is so much more dangerous, astronomically more dangerous than flying in a commercial airline, that the FAA figured out they would have 10 more infant deaths on the road for every 1 death they prevented in in an airplane crash, if the FAA required parents to buy an extra seat for their kids. So that's why you can bring a lap child under 2 and not pay for another ticket in a car seat for them, because in the bigger picture, the kid is safer on an airplane. So I really like this. This is an example of considering all of the right kinds of factors. Okay, now to the field I've spent my most time in, which is healthcare. How can we be healthier with operations research? This particular application I haven't worked on, which is optimizing radiation therapy for treating a tumor. If you have a tumor, and what I'm looking at in the first image is a brain tumor, we would like to kill it with radiation. Unfortunately, when you aim a beam of radiation at a person, it goes in a straight line through them, and it damages all of the tissue that it touches. But we really just want to have a high dose of tissue killing radiation right on the tumor where we need to stop that tumor from growing. So they do this with constructive interference. They aim the beam at lots of different angles through the person. So this is a 3D problem. What angle do you choose the beam to be at, and how much radiation do you shoot along that beam? And hopefully, as you see here, we have the tumor that we want to radiate. We have constructive interference where you get a really high dose of radiation to the tumor that needs to be stopped from growing. And then all of these other collateral damage areas get a low dose, or they're restricted to be no higher than a certain amount of radiation. And you might have these really fragile structures like a brainstem, something you really want to avoid radiating. And here's another example of an image from some patent application, I think, for one of these radiation optimization applications. And all of these numbers are describing sort of how all these different colors and shapes and numbers are saying, how bad would it be to deliver doses of radiation to these different parts of the person? And the problem gets harder too, because if they're breathing or moving in the space, you have to account for the uncertainty of where the beam will go. So this is a really cool application. These types of problems, these combinatorial optimization problems, they take a very long time to solve. Sometimes they run overnight, or a day or so, to try to make a radiation plan for one patient for one tumor. But it's a really exciting area, I think, to use mathematics to actually prescribe what kind of medical treatment a person gets. There's a ton of operations research in the hospital in terms of scheduling when your operation is going to go, and making sure that there are enough supplies in each of the different stations, and that you have enough nurses on call overnight, et cetera. Tons of these operational questions around hospitals, but I'm going to mostly talk here about when you have an optimization problem that lets you prescribe what is the right treatment for a patient. So that's kind of cool. And the operations research problem I've worked the most on, I think, is in getting people a kidney transplant. This is kidney paired exchange, kidney paired donation. And it's a way of circumventing incompatibility between a living donor and their intended recipient. So on the left, you have a person who wants to donate to their brother, and maybe someone else wants to donate to a person who is in their workplace that they know needs a kidney. But in each of those cases, the donor is told, well, you're the wrong blood type to give to this recipient. Or maybe you have what are called HLA, human leukocyte antigen antibodies, that will reject this kidney immediately. So unfortunately, you can't give a kidney to this person. And 15, 20 years ago, when that donor came forward, the doctor just sent them home. Like, you can't donate to your friend. However, now we have kidney exchange registries where we set up exchanges between these families. So maybe you can't give to your brother, but you can give to a total stranger. And that stranger has someone that cares about them that is going to give the kidney to your brother. So you are able to get more people transplanted. And remember that 15 years ago, when we didn't have exchange registries, those donors were sent home and they never donated a kidney. So kidney exchange isn't just distributing a resource fairly. It's actually more resource. Like it's not cutting up the pie differently. It's more pie for everyone because more people find that their wish to become a donor is fulfilled. And implementing this has increased the number of living donations by 20%. It's the biggest increase in living donation that's ever been seen. And I'm going to tell you about the sort of formative work that made this happen. My husband, Dori Segev, is a transplant surgeon. He brought this problem to me when he was a transplant fellow and I was a graduate student. And we wrote a paper on it that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And this really started my whole career in using operations research to help transplantation as a system work better, because transplantation is sort of the ultimate, distributing a scarce resource fairly problem. There is a finite supply of organs for everyone, and we're trying to get as many transplants as we can. Okay, but I was talking about kidney exchange. So how is this a mathematics problem? What exactly operations research methodology did I apply to it? So we can think about the problem like this. Each of those circles is a donor and the recipient that they wanted to donate to, but they don't match. So inside, let's say circle 3, you have a donor and a recipient. The donor in 3 can't give to the recipient in 3. Unfortunately, the donor in 3 isn't compatible with any of the recipients in this graph. And this graph is actually drawn to be, it's pretty quantitatively accurate. This is about what a real one looks like. And I'll give you, in a second, I'm going to get to the methods that I use to make these. These are virtual patients. They're not real patients, but this is about what it looks like in a real pool of people who are incompatible with their intended recipient. So the arrows that I'm drawing here say maybe the donor in pair 2 can donate to the recipient in pair 4. But the donor in pair 4 can't give to the recipient in 2. But the donor in pair 4 could give to somebody else. Maybe the donor in pair 4 gives to, let's see, the recipient in 0, and then 0's donor gives to 2. So something like that. What we're looking for here is a cycle decomposition or a maximum k-way matching among this on this graph. We want to find a bunch of cycles, loops that get everybody in the loop transplanted, and none of the loops can intersect with any other loops because each of those circles is just one donor and one recipient. So this is a super interesting problem mathematically. It's easy to solve if you only do two-way exchanges, and it's easy to solve if you allow any number of people to be involved in the exchange. But when you restrict and say, you can do two-way or three-way or four-way loops, but you can't do a loop with 10 people, it becomes very computationally difficult. In fact, so interesting that within operations research, we keep getting new papers and new mathematical formulations being designed for this problem, depending on the structure of how many edges you think there are going to be and how many different types of people are involved in this exchange. So it's neat that there's an interplay going between the real world problem that we want to solve. We actually need an answer here to help people get transplanted. We need to make a recommendation. And then there's like the, ooh, that's really interesting mathematically. I'm going to head back to the drawing board and see if I can come up with a better algorithm for solving this problem quickly. Because in practice, if there are 500 or so people here, you may not be able with existing methods to even find the best solution that guarantees you've gotten the most people transplanted. So even already with this tiny little one, it's kind of hard to stare at it and say that you've found the optimal solution. For instance, I might think, okay, the best thing to do is exchange 7, 0, and 10. It turns out 7, 0, and 10 wouldn't allow you to exchange any other pairs in this matching. So that's not a great solution because only 3 people get a transplant when actually this one was possible. There's a 3-way exchange between 0, 4, and 10, and then a 2-way between 7 and 11. Oh, I forgot to say, what's the reason why we can't have a loop with 10 pairs involved? That's because each of those pairs tends to be kind of medically fragile. Either maybe the donor drops out or the recipient gets an infection, or you think that 4 is compatible with 6, but it turns out at the last minute we do a test and we decide they're actually not compatible. So if it's a large exchange, it's very brittle and it's easy to fall apart. So that's why we make the exchanges smaller. And there's some other reasons too, but so you end up with, because of all of the practical concerns of really matching these people for kidney transplants, with a mathematically interesting problem and something that you can go home and play with and noodle around. And it's cool for me to see that this continues to be a rich area of math within operations research.
Sommer, there's a question. It's more in general, but I think maybe it's a good icebreaker at this point to get more questions. So can you give some examples of OR simulation use cases in the industry? It's oftentimes difficult for non-OR audience to understand the benefits of simulation versus optimization. Typically, we hear more optimization examples.
Ooh, it's so cool that you're asking me this question, because I literally just zoomed in on my simulation example. So simulation means that you're having the computer generate an imaginary situation, and maybe you have the computer generate for you thousands of imaginary situations, but they reflect what's happening in the real world. So you could think that simulation is a tool for predictive analytics, that you're trying to say what will happen in this system. And I'll give you this example, which is how I discovered what those graphs are supposed to look like. Because remember, I said 15 years ago, if you went to your doctor and you said, I want to give a kidney to my brother, and you didn't match, then the doctor would send you home and no one would write down the fact that you showed up or that you were willing to donate. So early on, kidney exchange was actually illegal. The National Organ Transplant Act said that you can't give a kidney for valuable consideration. So is giving someone an A blood type kidney for them to give you back a B blood type kidney, is that selling your organ? Is that an exchange of valuable goods? And the Department of Justice said yes, that kidney exchange was illegal. So it did happen before it was legalized, but we really wanted to push Congress to change the law. Unfortunately, we didn't have a database of the people who were willing to donate a kidney, but they didn't match their recipient. So we had to invent one. We didn't have any data, so we made some up. What we did was we found the population frequencies of different blood type alleles. And when you inherit your blood type, you get one allele from one parent and one allele from the other parent. And blood type is such an important part of kidney matching. We had to consider the fact that most of your likely donors are related to you. We couldn't just say everybody has population average blood type. We had to say, if your parent wanted to give to you, how likely are they to match your blood type? If your child wanted to give to you, how likely are they to match your blood type? So this is what we did. We had, say, these purple squares. The purple people are imaginary people, virtual people who have population average blood types. And the people in orange, they've inherited their blood types according to the regular laws of inheritance from their parents. And so we took all of these families and we said, okay, if you are a person who needs a transplant, you have all of these people who are potentially your donor. Are you likely to be, is your donor likely to pass a medical workup? Are they well enough to donate a kidney? And then do they have antigens that would reject the kidney, and do they match your blood type? And so we have all of these virtual families, and we simulate whether or not you'd be able to donate a kidney. And if you can donate a kidney, we put them in the direct donation bucket. And if nobody was well enough to donate, then we say you didn't have a donor available. And then if you had a donor available, but they were the wrong blood type, we put you into this bucket. And then we just kept generating more and more virtual families until we reached the number of direct donations that we had in the last year. There were 6,400 donations, direct donations from a living donor the year that we started. So we said, if that's how many people were able to donate, then there are somewhere between 2,500 and 4,500 donors out there who were frustrated, who were sent home. and we know what their blood types look like, and we know what their health looked like. And now we have this green pool of people that we've completely invented, but we think this is who's out there that doesn't have, that has a donor, but they're an incompatible donor. And we used this simulation to prove to Congress that an additional 1,000 to 2,000 people every year would get a kidney. And that's exactly what happened now with National's share. We have 1,200 to 1,500 additional living donor transplants every year from this pool. So we didn't know anything about them, and we used simulation to pass this law. In 2007, on the basis of our evidence, Congress passed the Norwood Act, legalizing paired donation. So the question, let me go back to the question. The question was, how is simulation related to optimization? So the project I just described for you, I used simulation to figure out what were the right population on which to apply my optimization matching techniques to get them a kidney transplant exchange. So I think they go hand in hand. And you can also, of course, combine simulation with optimization, where you run a simulated situation and you say, oh, I wanted something different to happen. So you run it with different parameters, and you can do that in a loop and use that as an optimization tool. But simulation is also really good for, I would call it, what if analysis. If you really only have maybe 5 different courses of action that you're considering, you could simulate all 5 of them and look at the outcomes. And that's a type of optimization, but it's more focused on the question of, is my simulation giving me a good ability to predict? So simulation, I think of it as a predictive, living in the predictive space, but of course these things are fluid, and a prediction becomes an optimization if you try it in different scenarios.
And then there are 2 questions, so both related to the kidney transplant. So one is that, are there concerns with misaligned incentives in the exchange registry? Is it likely for donors to drop out after their family friends have received an organ?
Yes, so that can happen. It's called reneging. If you wanted to give a kidney, but then your family member received one, and then you decided not to donate. They used to require all the donations in an exchange to be simultaneous, so that everyone decided at once, and there was no way to back out afterwards. In practice, we don't see that being a very large problem. It does happen, but there are ways to solve it, for instance, with non-directed donors coming in to the pool. So to make sure that the small number of people who do decide later to withdraw as donors, we have to respect everyone's autonomy. You would never force someone who was unwilling to be a donor. But in terms of incentives, it's likely that many people who do give directly to their family members are not quite as good a match as a stranger might be. If you had a whole pool of everyone in the United States and you said, who's the best match for my loved one? It's probably not you. There's probably a better match out there. So we're kind of aiming towards getting many more people to exchange kidneys. Even if they have the possibility of giving directly, they might be able to get really good matches for everyone, and the transplanted kidneys would last a lot longer. This is a new initiative going on at NYU called Kidney for Life, where they're taking even compatible pairs and saying, maybe you can trade with someone else to get the exact right genetic match for your intended recipient.
And then the related question is, can patients with a living donor also register for the wait list of deceased donors?
Yes, they can also register to wait for a deceased donor. The deceased donor waiting list is quite long, and most candidates wait 5 years or longer. It's quite dangerous, and a lot more candidates die on the waiting list than ever receive a transplant. So the situation with the shortage of deceased donor kidneys is dire, and so recapturing these living donors is really important.
And then there is another question, more general, which I think is interesting. What have you learned about how to explain the complex methodology to non-OR folks?
Oh, that is a great question. I will jump into my next application, and I'll introduce it really briefly because it does get at that question of how do I make this understandable? So allocating livers. Livers briefly are allocated within these fixed regions of the country. And some of those regions have different balance of demand and supply. So you have shortages in some places, but you have surpluses in other places. And everyone was really invested in keeping this system. They really didn't want to give up access to their organs. This is showing the extreme shortage in California, New York, Chicago. These places had very difficult to get a liver. And the liver surgeons did not want to give up any of the livers that they were able to transplant for their patients. This turned into a thing that they called the liver wars. So it was very important in transplantation to be transparent because the donated deceased donor organs are a national resource. Everyone has to see how they will be allocated. And we decided to do a redistricting problem, just like gerrymandering for voting districts, but we wanted to redraw the districts so there would be an equal balance of supply and demand. So no place had an extreme shortage and no place had an extreme surplus. And we had to keep reformulating the integer program for solving this. And the reason I so all of the optimization problems I showed you already have an integer program like what I'm showing you underlying them, but many of them are so complicated I couldn't really put them on the screen. This one I'm putting up because it's an example of that. It was the human negotiation. I had to explain to the liver committee what each of these equations meant and how they reflected that the rules that those liver transplant surgeons had told me, that they wanted there to be 11 regions. That's the first equation. And that they wanted there to be, and that these next two equations figure out how much demand and supply is in each place. And I was minimizing the difference between the demand and the supply in the overall system at the top. And then this last equation just is a compactness constraint, so that you get regions that stick together in one piece and they're not scattered about the country. What happened was I proposed this model to the liver committee, and then they said, no, we don't like the map that you drew because some of those regions don't have a large enough number of transplant centers in them. They didn't want any of these regions to have fewer than 6 transplant centers. And that was great because I said, oh, I didn't know that that was a rule. I didn't know that you wanted to make sure there were several transplant centers in each of these regions I'm designing. Okay, I go back to the drawing board and I put in a new equation that says there have to be at least 6 transplant centers in each region. And that was a real lovely puzzle, actually. That's my favorite part of what I'm doing, is helping physicians and the community translate what they want out of the situation into an equation. Because in some cases, by being operations researchers, by telling them, we can maximize your output, we can get you the most fairness or the lowest budget constraint, or we can get you, the largest number of lives saved with these number of livers that you have. It forces all of the other people at the table to be explicit about their goals and their motivations. And I did have some surgeons stand up to the microphone and say, I don't care about fairness. I don't think we should share livers equally. I think we should do the thing that makes the system the most money, which was shocking to me, but I was happy that I forced people to say, okay, my problem with this system is that I don't have the same goal, rather than sort of a backwards or political description of what's going on. So yeah, I think there's a lot to help communities grow in their decision-making power by focusing them on, well, can you explain to me what the goal of changing the system is? And can you explain to me what are the constraints that make a certain way of designing the system impossible? That's actually the plus for involving operations researchers in a policymaking process. And I do see the fear and the negative things that have happened when sometimes members of the OR profession are, are frustrated or can't manage to make their methods clear. But I like being in that translator role in between, because I think both sides grow a lot from it. Okay, so I've given you a tiny little bit of that. Our system that we invented to redistrict liver allocation would have dramatically improved the situation. And because of the work that we did, the United Network for Organ Sharing changed their algorithm for liver transplants, and there are 100 or more deaths being prevented every year now because they have addressed this geographic disparity in liver allocation. So those are the kinds of things that I'm super proud of. We are making things better for transplant patients through the operations research that we're doing. Let me conclude. You can be faster, safer, healthier with operations research. This is an article that appeared in Time magazine about, that's myself and my husband, Dory, that I told you about. He's a transplant surgeon, but he understands all my algorithms, and we have a lot of fun working together. It's really cool that operations research is sexy. It's accessible to explain why solving these problems matters to people. So I love being in this field for that reason. And the Boston Globe once called operations research the most influential academic discipline you've never heard of. So the reason I'm giving this talk is I want more people to get what operations research is and see how these methods that are the same ones that, people sometimes they call them data analytics or machine learning. It's all really the same secret sauce underneath. It's these techniques for choosing the best possible solution out of an enormous combinatorial number of possibilities. And I would love to answer some more questions. We have just a couple of minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. This was great. Very nice talk. So if there are more questions, please feel free to type it. I don't know if if the audience has the option of unmuting themselves for talking. Do they do or not?
I am not positive if we have that set up or not.
Okay, that's fine. We can still use the Q&A feature. Okay, so there is one question. Do you see specific applications of ML in healthcare?
Absolutely. Well, I would tend to think that machine learning usually refers to predictive analytics. And so it can be used to say personalize medicine. So I want to give the right dose of a certain medicine or choose the right course of therapy. And I think machine learning has a lot of promise there in trying to differentiate. Well, every person has this one type of cancer, but some of them have a large tumor and some of them have a small tumor, and some of them, have a certain genetic profile and some don't. And you could use machine learning, I think, to really drill down and have many different subcategories of patient and try to find them the right treatment for them, as opposed to giving everyone the same treatment. I think that's one area I'm seeing a lot of new work coming out in.
Any other questions? So going back, this is like what I always find it hard to explain to non-OR people of the difference between all of these fields, even though they're really not much different. We don't see much difference between machine learning, AI, analytics. So how do you explain these to non-OR people? What we do specifically under operations research, which might be different from those, or you just say that they're the same, at least the objective of them?
I generally say that they're the same. I try to understand whether the person is describing a predictive analytics or a prescriptive analytics application. That tends to be the big dividing line. Some people just want to say these patients are going to do well and these ones aren't, and some people want to say these patients get treatment A and these patients get treatment B. And to me, those are fairly different setups. But yeah, I mean, I would say I wish people wouldn't get hung up on the names that we are using to call these things. So I try to say, okay, what are the inputs and what are the outputs? What do you want me to do? Are we trying to decide what treatment? Are we going to, assign them to groups, or do we just want to know which ones we predict are going to do better, and all of those kinds of questions, and maybe get a little bit away from the names. But I think there's nothing for it. And sometimes I just say, I'm doing AI. I'll be honest. Of course I'm doing AI. I'm doing the same thing I was doing 10 years ago, and I didn't write AI at the top of the page, but okay.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll get one more question, which was related to the previous one. So anything further contribution of ML or AI in general on improving quality in healthcare?
Improving quality is a big morass because there's behavioral responses in there. You can set up, there's a focus now on metrics, and can you say, oh, this hospital is not doing as good a job of taking patients as these other ones? But those initiatives have been a lot counterproductive. And so for now, I would say we've seen some failures of machine learning and AI to really diagnose problems in the healthcare system. And there are times when you have to step back and say, every patient really is different, and there's value in letting the physicians make the decision for the patient that's in front of them. I have tended towards applications like in the policy for transplantation, where I'm not trying to dictate what every patient is. I'm only looking at trying to share a shared resource where there's no recourse but to have some sort of allocation mechanism.
Okay. All right. So I have one more that will make this the last one. It's a good question, I think. So which one would you say is more challenging, solving the model and come up with model complexity, or convincing the domain experts that the model is going to make improvements?
Very clearly, the latter is harder. It is. I started out this career very optimistically. I believed that if I could prove this was the very best system for the stated goal, that then of course it would be implemented. And it's hard to realize that that's not always the case. But I would say that drives me to become better at communicating the value of operations research. And I think Informs is doing a good job of, we have an initiative, government, we have great outreach to try to help more people realize that operations research can help make these complex decisions and really improve lives.
Okay, thank you very much, Sommer. Thank you to Jill, Tracy, Informs staff for making this happen. And thank you to all of you for being here and for the great questions that you asked. The talk was recorded. Jill is going to share the link with you, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.